On the flight to Las Vegas, I was able to watch this documentary on Zora Neale Hurston, and I'm so glad that it was available. And I checked, this documentary is actually on YouTube for free. And I believe that it is a great documentary to get to the root of how Zora Neale Hurston was able to create the works of literature that she was able to create. Some of Zora's story could have been told today, some of the things that she went through as a little girl. Zora was born in 1891, and her mother died when she was 13 years old. She was the fifth out of eight children, and her father basically sent her off to boarding school when her mother died. He no longer wanted to or couldn't take care of his daughter. So he sent her away to boarding school. He paid for the first year of school, and then she was cleaning floors and cleaning up the boarding school for the second year. And then basically after that, she was homeless and on her own. So that basically shows that this whole deadbeatness goes way, 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 way back. Even though we know that intellectually, this woman's life mirrors what many people have gone through. And this was a time when, he was actually married. He got remarried really quickly, but he still kicked her out and basically said, you got this now. And she was 13 when he kicked her out. But that still was part of her coming of age story. So she was basically on her own since she was a teen, and she wasn't formally educated because she had to leave school. What she did, she made her way up to DC and she went to Howard Academy, which was a feeder school to Howard University. And she had to act like she was 10 years younger to go to school for free. So that's what she did. That's how she got her high school education. And after Howard Academy, she went to Howard University, where she studied anthropology. And she studied anthropology under Franz Boas, which was a world renowned anthropologist that was changing how anthropology was being done. And this was how she started learning different things and got her background and her information for how she launched her literary career. So all of this goes together. This man in the middle, down below me, that's Franz Boas. Way back in the day, he had some groundbreaking thoughts as far as anthropology, saying that Negroes were not inferior to other races. That was Professor Franz Boas of Columbia University. He swats down the ideas of white supremacy, and this was like I said, in the late 1800s. Another headline from Franz Boas, it says Professor Franz Boas hits inferiority of race doctrine. So he is basically, his works were basically talking about how non-white people aren't inferior. Because before that, anthropology was basically like these men, these alabaster men, going into communities that were not, where they weren't a member, and they were studying them. However, it would typically come from the stance of the white people being superior to these non-white groups. And that's how they came about studying and getting their basis for anthropology. And that's how a lot of sexism and racism were baked into the cake of many sciences and social sciences. And that's how many of the stereotypes about non-white people came about. Because when these white people would go into these groups, they already had a bias against them where they are superior to these other groups. So when they started reporting on them and making entertainment about them, it was to basically laugh about them. And these stereotypes have persisted throughout the generations, throughout hundreds of years, because of how racism and sexism is steeped into many of these social sciences. So Zora studied under Franz Boas when she went to Barnard College and Columbia University in the 20s. This is where Boas was a professor. He was a professor at Columbia, and he was a leading figure in the field. And when he sent Zora into the field to do her anthropology work, she was a member of the group, and she worked from the inside out, because she would listen to their dialect. Even if she wasn't a part of the group, she would listen and begin to be a part of the group. So they would tell her stories. Here she would be listening, she would be learning the dances, she would be learning the music, and she was part of the group. So she was able to get this she was able to do a new path of anthropology because she was a member of the group and they were just basically telling her stories. Whereas before they were the white people would just be looking and observing. But y'all know how, like, when somebody comes into your house and you don't know them, they're a stranger, you're not going to speak to them the way, you talk to a friend or a family member or someone that you're comfortable with. So she had an insider's perspective, and that changed anthropology. So here is Zora. This was one of the times that she was out observing men working on the railroad. She literally had a pew pew on her hip, and they were saying that she was dressed like a modern day colored Annie Oakley. So here is video footage that she captured of these black men working on the railroad and the white man just like overseeing. And she's watching, and many times she is the only woman for miles and miles. That's the reason why she had the pew pew for her, defense if she needed it. But this woman was obviously fearless. So this is Charlotte Osgood Mason. She was one of Zora's benefactors that helped her continue her studies, that helped give her money, and she was able to immerse herself in these communities because of the money from Miss Mason. Some points about Miss Mason. She was a wealthy white New York City socialite and patron of the arts who played a significant role in supporting African American artists and writers during the Harlem Renaissance, including Zora Neale Hurston. Mason believed in the importance of preserving and promoting African American culture and folklore. Now, when they were showing video clips of Miss Mason in her home, she would be surrounded by these little colored folks, and it would seem like she was using them for her entertainment, and that was kind of odd. But this woman was integral in how Zora was able to afford to be able to be out in the field. But the situation was kind of strained because she made Zora account for every penny, and Zora was kind of a wild card. She wanted to just be free to do whatever, but she had restrictions because Miss Mason was fronting the bill. Now, obviously, when someone is giving you money, you have to follow their rules. But Miss Mason was also like, you can have one pair of shoes for the year. And obviously, well, not obviously, but Zora was like, I need another pair of shoes. And she had to come like begging her to get more things that she actually needed. So that's the reason why things were kind of strained. And because Miss Mason was pretty strict about it, Zora couldn't talk with Franz Boas when she was accepting money from Miss Mason. One of the projects that Miss Mason helped finance was when Zora interviewed this man, Cudjoe, who was the last slave that came over from West Africa, who was still alive to give this interview. And he actually still had memories of living in West Africa and being brought over. So Zora was able to live with him, interview him, and write down all that she had learned from this man. And she used this she used this time spent with this man to write a book. The book was called Barracoon. If you haven't read it, I actually read this book, and I read Their Eyes Were Watching God. But what I like about Zora, and what people often criticized her about, was how true she stayed to dialect. So one of the things that she was criticized on was how she was like literally writing things out how he said it. So it was this slave dialect that she was using. And for the Harlem Renaissance time period, that was kind of irritating to those people because of the respectability politics, and they wanted everything to be shined up and fancy and everything. And then here comes Zora Neale Hurston attempting to humanize and keep things as true to form as possible. So that's why many Harlem's Renaissance people came for her. Richard Wright, the author, being one of those people that came for her. He was talking about their eyes were watching God, basically saying that she was creating like a minstrel show for white folks to laugh, and basically saying that her book had no theme, no message, no thought. Now, her career was wrought with sexism and racism. She had the mentorship from Professor Franz Boas, but when it came to asking him for recommendations so that she could get a fellowship and a scholarship, he said that her the way she worked was erratic, and they just basically said that she wasn't ready for this. So even though he was kind of progressive, some of his viewpoints were still seeped in sexism and racism because he was still an authority figure and she was doing things her own way and trying to create her own lane. And sometimes with these credentialing bodies, they're not always accepting of people like this. She was kind of ahead of her time. And then with the Black literary confines, not confines, the Harlem Renaissance people, the Black people who were artists of that time, they weren't always supportive of this woman and her work. And actually, there was some kind of scandal where she was shunned by the whole community. And even when she was vindicated, the people who shunned her never came back into her life, to the point where she ended up broke. She ended up having to clean homes for a living just to make some money. She didn't have any money at the end of her life. She started smoking. She basically developed diseases of old age, and she actually died broke at the age of 69. It took Alice Walker going out in search of Zora Neale Hurston to bring Zora back into the world of literature and to highlight her works of art. And I'm very glad that Miss Walker did that and brought her into our purview, because many times the voices of Black women were silenced. They were silenced by white people who felt they were superior, and they were also silenced by Black men who wanted pretty much all of the shine. So, if you haven't had the chance to read any of her works, I suggest you do so. And like I said, this documentary is free, it's on YouTube. I gave you some of the bullet points of this documentary, but it's definitely worth 2 hours of your time, and you'll get so much history condensed down into this one documentary. All right, jump in the comments. Let me know. Have you read anything by Zora Neale Hurston? What do you think of all of this? What do you think of some of the themes that are coming into it, like a father's abandonment, the sexism and racism that were back then that we're still seeing today? I think it's all still so relevant with the things and the strides that we're making today that we've been fighting for hundreds of years in this country. Jump in the comments. Let me know what you think. Don't forget to like, comment, and share.